Bullies slapped the black girl in the hallway until her Hell's Angel uncle arrived, and everything in that school changed in the blink of an eye. A quiet substitute teacher walks into work expecting a normal day, but one slap from a group of cruel bullies sends her world crashing down. Their video goes viral, mocking her, shaming her, breaking her, and while the school tries to shut her up, bury the truth, and protect the kids with rich last names, someone else sees that video. A man on a roaring motorcycle. A man with a past most people fear. A man who's not here for fists. He's here for justice. But when he starts digging, he finds something even darker. A whole system built to protect the bullies and silence everyone else. It's what happens when the truth hits back harder than any bully ever could. Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning sun filtered through the wide windows of Ridgewood High's art room, casting warm patterns across the empty desks. Ava Daniels moved quietly between the tables, setting out supplies for her substitute lesson with methodical care. Her fingers brushed over the smooth sheets of paper, arranging them in neat stacks as she hummed softly to herself. "Maybe today will be different," she whispered, trying to believe it. The art room had always been her sanctuary, even as a substitute teacher. Here, surrounded by student artwork and the familiar scent of paint, she could almost forget the whispers and stares that followed her through the halls. The warning bell rang, its shrill tone breaking through her moment of peace. Ava gathered her teacher's manual and stepped into the hallway, her sensible shoes clicking against the polished floor. The corridor quickly filled with students, their voices echoing off the metal lockers. That's when she saw them, the group she'd learned to watch for. Madison, Kaylee, and their friends stood in a tight cluster, designer bags slung over their shoulders, phones held high as they recorded themselves. They were blocking the entire hallway, forcing other students to squeeze past them against the lockers. Ava's heart quickened, but she straightened her spine. As a teacher, she had a responsibility. "Excuse me, girls," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the hallway noise. "Could you please move to the side? Other students need to get through." Madison turned, her perfectly lined lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, look, it's Miss Daniels," she drawled, making sure her phone was still recording. "The substitute who thinks she can tell us what to do." The other girls giggled, their phones now all pointed at Ava. She felt her cheeks warm, but kept her voice steady. "Please, I'm just asking you to—" The slap came without warning. Madison's hand connected with Ava's cheek with a crack that seemed to silence the entire hallway. The force of it snapped Ava's head to the side, sending her stumbling back a step. Her hand flew to her face, the skin burning beneath her fingers. Time seemed to freeze. Dozens of students stood motionless, watching. A math teacher quickly turned and walked the other way. The school security guard suddenly found something fascinating to study on his phone. "Oh my God, that's totally going viral," Kaylee squealed, zooming in on Ava's reddening cheek with her phone. The girls sauntered away, their laughter echoing down the hall as they high-fived each other. Ava stood rooted to the spot, her entire body trembling. Students began to move again, flowing around her like water around a rock, careful not to meet her eyes. The school nurse, Mrs. Peterson, found her still standing there several minutes later. "Oh, honey," she said softly, taking Ava's elbow. "Come with me." In the small nurse's office, Mrs. Peterson pressed a cold pack to Ava's cheek, while the vice principal, Mr. Roberts, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. "Now, Miss Daniels," he said in a tone that made Ava shrink inside herself. "I understand there was a misunderstanding in the hallway." "A misunderstanding?" Ava's voice cracked. "Sir, she slapped me. There are witnesses, videos—" "Let's not blow this out of proportion," Mr. Roberts interrupted. Madison's family are significant donors to our school. I'm sure this was just a moment of high spirits getting out of hand. Perhaps if you had approached the situation differently." Ava stared at him in disbelief, her cheek throbbing beneath the ice pack. Mrs. Peterson shot the vice principal a disgusted look, but said nothing. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ava taught her classes mechanically, trying to ignore the whispers and snickers from students who had seen the incident or heard about it. By the time she got to her car that afternoon, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. The drive home was a tunnel of gathering darkness, both outside and in her mind. At a red light, her phone buzzed with a notification. Without thinking, she opened it. There it was, the video, already with thousands of views. Madison had posted it with the caption, "When the substitute gets too big for her boots. Teacher fail." Got what she deserved. The comments scrolled endlessly. "Mo, she just stood there like a statue. What kind of teacher lets students talk to her like that? Weak. She probably deserved it. TBH. Imagine being such a pushover." Ava barely made it into her apartment before the tears came. She sank onto her small couch, the glow of her phone screen illuminating her tear-stained face in the dark room. The video played on loop, her humiliation preserved forever in high definition, shared and reshared, each view like another slap to her face. Outside her window, the city lights blurred through her tears. The phone in her hand continued to buzz with notifications, each one a reminder of how quickly cruelty could spread in the digital age. Her cheek still burned, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest, the crushing weight of public shame and helplessness. In the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by the art supplies and half-finished paintings that usually brought her joy, Ava had never felt more alone. The gentle soul who had entered Ridgewood High that morning with hopes for a better day now sat in darkness, wondering how she would face tomorrow. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching Ava's mood as she pulled into Ridgewood High's parking lot 45 minutes early. Her cheek still held a faint pink tinge where Madison had struck her. She had covered it carefully with makeup, though the memory stung far worse than the mark itself. The halls were quiet at this hour, her footsteps echoing against the lockers as she made her way to the administrative office. Mrs. Garcia, the secretary, looked up with sympathetic eyes as Ava approached her desk. "I need to file an incident report about yesterday," Ava said softly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to keep them from shaking. Before Mrs. Garcia could respond, Principal Stewart's door opened. "Ms. Daniels, please come in." His tone was clipped, professional. "The superintendent is on video call." Ava's stomach dropped, but she followed him into the office. On the large monitor mounted on the wall, Superintendent Walsh's stern face filled the screen. Principal Stewart gestured for Ava to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Ms. Daniels," Superintendent Walsh began, her voice crackling through the speakers. "We've reviewed the situation from yesterday, and frankly, we're concerned about your handling of it." Ava blinked in confusion. "My handling of it? I was assaulted in the hallway." "The video can be interpreted in many ways," Principal Stewart cut in smoothly. "From our perspective, you escalated a minor situation into a confrontation." "But I didn't." Ava's voice caught in her throat. "I only asked them to clear the hallway." "Your tone must have been provocative," Superintendent Walsh said. "Madison's parents are understandably upset about how you approached their daughter." Ava's hands trembled in her lap. "She slapped me, in front of everyone." "The situation looks worse on camera than it actually was," Principal Stewart said, shuffling some papers on his desk. "We have to consider the safety of our students first and foremost." "The safety of—" Ava stopped, struggling to process what she was hearing. "I'm the one who was hit." "Given the circumstances," Superintendent Walsh continued, as if Ava hadn't spoken. "We're placing you on temporary suspension while we conduct a thorough investigation to ensure student safety." The words hit Ava like physical blows. Suspension? But I didn't do anything wrong. "Ms. Daniels," Principal Stewart's voice took on an edge of warning. "This situation has already garnered unwanted attention on social media. For the sake of the school's reputation and your future career prospects, I suggest you handle this discreetly." Ava sat in stunned silence as Principal Stewart held out his hand. "Your badge, please." With trembling fingers, Ava unclipped her teacher's ID from her blouse. As she placed it in his waiting palm, she felt as though she were surrendering more than just a plastic card. She was giving up her dignity, her security, her voice. "We'll be in touch," Superintendent Walsh said, her image disappearing from the screen without further comment. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. Inside her apartment, Ava sank onto her couch, the morning sun casting accusatory shadows across her living room. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed her mother's number. "Mom?" Her voice cracked on the single syllable. "Ava? Honey, what's wrong?" Clara Daniels' warm voice came through the speaker, immediately concerned. The whole story spilled out. The slap, the video, the suspension. Clara listened with growing anger and distress. "Those horrible people," Clara breathed. "Sweetheart, this isn't right. There must be something we can do." "I don't know what to do, Mom," Ava whispered. "I can't afford to lose this job. I can barely make rent as it is." There was a long pause on the line. "There might be someone who could help," Clara said hesitantly. "Your Uncle Reaper." Uncle Reaper. The name stirred distant memories in Ava's mind. "I barely remember him." Clara sighed heavily. "We haven't spoken in years. There were conflicts, things said that couldn't be taken back, but he always had a way of making things right when the system failed." "What happened between you two?" "That's a story for another time," Clara said softly. "Just know that sometimes family complications run deeper than we can see on the surface." As evening settled over the city, Ava stood at her small stove, stirring a pot of leftover soup she couldn't bring herself to eat. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications as the video spread further. Out of morbid curiosity, she checked the view count. Over 100,000 now, with comments pouring in from around the country. A particular comment caught her eye, making her freeze. "Wait, Ava Daniels? From Millbrook Middle School? No way." The username made her heart skip a beat. Someone from her past. Someone she hadn't thought about in years. Someone who knew another story she'd tried to forget. The soup began to boil over, snapping her back to the present. She turned off the burner with shaking hands, leaving the pot untouched as she retreated to her bedroom. Hours later, Ava lay in bed, staring at the shadows dancing across her ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Just yesterday morning, she had been a teacher with a future, even if it was a modest one. Now she was suspended, humiliated, and rapidly becoming a cautionary tale on social media. Her mother's words about Uncle Reaper echoed in her mind, along with that disturbing comment from her past. The dark seemed to press in around her as questions swirled. How had everything unraveled so quickly? What secrets lay in her family's history? And how could she possibly put her life back together when it felt like the whole world was against her? The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 2:45 in the morning, but Ava knew sleep would not come easily tonight. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Joey's roadside cafe, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Reaper Daniels sat in his usual corner booth, massive shoulders hunched over a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. His weathered hands, marked with faded tattoos, wrapped around the ceramic mug as if seeking warmth that wasn't there. "Hey, Reap, you gotta see this," called out Snake, one of his old riding brothers, sliding into the booth across from him. Snake's phone was already out, thumb scrolling through social media. Some teacher got smacked around by some rich kid, videos blowing up everywhere. Reaper barely glanced up, his expression unchanged. "Since when do you follow school drama?" "Just watch," Snake insisted, turning the phone toward him. With a resigned sigh, Reaper leaned forward to watch the video. The scene unfolded in cruel clarity. A group of sneering teenagers, a gentle-voiced teacher, the sharp crack of a hand against flesh. But it was the name in the caption that made his coffee-colored eyes go wide. Ava Daniels. "That's my niece," he breathed, voice rough with shock. Snake's eyebrows shot up. "Your sister Clara's kid? The little artist?" Memories crashed over Reaper like a wave. A tiny girl with paint-stained fingers showing him her drawings, Clara's tearful face during their last argument, 15 years of silence, stretching between then and now. His massive hands clenched into fists on the table. "How long ago was this posted?" he demanded. "Yesterday morning. It's got over 200,000 views now." Reaper stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The few other customers in the cafe jumped at the sudden movement from the intimidating biker. "I'm heading to Ridgewood," he announced, dropping a $20 bill on the table. Snake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Need company?" "No." Reaper's voice was firm. "This is family business." Within 30 minutes, Reaper had packed a small duffel with essentials, clothes, toiletries, the burner phone he kept for emergencies. His movements were precise, efficient, born from years of life on the road. As he strapped the bag to his custom Harley-Davidson, memories continued to assault him. The last time he'd seen Ava, she'd been 17 years old, already showing signs of the gentle soul she'd become. He'd missed so much: her college graduation, her first teaching job, all the birthdays and holidays in between. His self-imposed exile had seemed necessary at the time, a way to protect his family from his dangerous past. Now, watching that video replay in his mind, he wondered if he'd only succeeded in leaving them vulnerable. The motorcycle roared to life beneath him, a familiar comfort as he pulled onto the highway. The spring air was crisp against his face as miles began to roll away beneath his wheels. Fields and forests blurred past as he pushed the bike harder, eating up distance with single-minded determination. Around noon, he stopped for gas at a small station off Interstate 80. As he filled the tank, his reflection caught his eye in the window, gray threading through his dark hair, lines carved deeper around his eyes, the old scar along his jaw more pronounced than ever. He looked every bit the aging outlaw he was, and for a moment, doubt crept in. What right did he have to crash back into their lives now? But then he remembered the sound of that slap, the way Ava had stood there taking it, just like Clara used to take their father's verbal abuse. His jaw tightened. No more. He might not deserve forgiveness, but he could still do this one thing right. The afternoon sun beat down as he crossed state lines, his shadow stretching longer across the asphalt. Other bikers nodded as they passed, recognizing a brother of the road, but Reaper barely noticed. His mind was 15 years in the past, remembering the night he'd walked away from his family. He'd thought he was protecting them, keeping his sister and niece safe from the enemies he'd made. But watching that video, seeing Ava standing alone against those cruel girls, he realized he'd only left them undefended. The thought burned in his chest like acid. Sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as he finally crossed into Ridgewood city limits. The suburban streets were quiet, peaceful, until the thunderous rumble of his Harley shattered the evening calm. Curtains twitched in windows as he passed, and a woman hurried her children inside at the sight of him. Let them stare, he thought grimly. Let them wonder why someone like him was in their pristine little town. They'd find out soon enough. The neon sign of the Pine Grove Motel buzzed and flickered as he pulled into the parking lot. It was the kind of place that didn't ask questions and accepted cash. Perfect for his needs. The night clerk barely looked up from his magazine as Reaper checked in, just pushed a key across the counter and went back to reading. Room 115 smelled of old cigarettes and cheap air freshener. Reaper dropped his duffel by the bed and stood at the window, looking out at the town lights. Somewhere out there was his niece, hurting and alone. Tomorrow, he'd find her. Tomorrow, he'd start making things right. He pulled out his phone and opened the video one last time, studying the school's details in the background. Ridgewood High School. He committed the name to memory, then deleted the video. He couldn't stand to watch it again. As midnight approached, Reaper lay on the creaking motel bed, fully dressed except for his boots. Sleep wouldn't come easy, but that was nothing new. His mind was already working through tomorrow's plans. Finding Ava, assessing the situation, dealing with anyone who needed dealing with. The ceiling fan spun lazy circles above him, casting shifting shadows across the room. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the walls. Reaper closed his eyes, but all he could see was that slap, playing over and over like a curse. "I'm here now, kid," he whispered into the darkness. "Uncle Reaper's here." The early morning sun cast long shadows across Ava's apartment complex as Reaper parked his motorcycle in the visitor's space. He double-checked the address he'd managed to track down, then walked up the concrete steps to apartment 3B, his heavy boots making dull thuds against each step. Inside, Ava was curled up on her couch in soft pajamas, barely having slept. Dark circles shadowed her eyes as she stared at her untouched coffee. The sharp knock at her door made her jump, spilling a few drops on her sleeve. She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Her breath caught at the sight of the intimidating figure outside, broad-shouldered and leather-clad, with tattoos visible on his neck above his jacket collar. Something about his face tugged at distant memories, but fear still made her hesitate. "Who is it?" she called, voice trembling slightly. "Ava, it's your Uncle Reaper, your mother's brother," he said, his gravelly voice gentler than his appearance would suggest. "I know it's been a long time, kid. I saw what happened at that school." Ava's hand froze on the doorknob. Through the peephole, she watched him shift his weight, looking almost uncertain despite his imposing presence. "I understand if you don't want to see me," he continued. "I've got a lot to make up for, but I want you to know you're not alone in this." Something in his tone, a mix of regret and determination, made Ava slowly open the door. Up close, his face was weathered but kind, with familiar eyes that reminded her of her mother's. "Uncle Reaper?" she whispered, fragments of childhood memories surfacing. A deep laugh, strong arms tossing her in the air, the rumble of a motorcycle. He nodded, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced, and I'm even more sorry for staying away so long. I saw that video yesterday and I couldn't." His jaw tightened. "I couldn't stand by this time." Ava hugged her arms around herself. "Are you here to do something to those girls?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm here to help you fight this the right way. No violence, no revenge, just justice." He met her eyes steadily. "Can we talk?" After a moment's hesitation, Ava stepped back, gesturing him inside. Her small living room was neat but sparse, with a few paintings on the walls, her own work, though she didn't mention it. Reaper sat carefully in an armchair, looking almost comically large against its delicate frame. Ava curled up on the couch, pulling a throw blanket around her shoulders like armor. "Tell me everything," he said softly. "From the beginning." And somehow, despite years of separation, Ava found herself talking. The words spilled out, how the wealthy students had targeted her from day one, the administration's indifference, the horrible moment of the slap, the humiliation of the video, and finally, the suspension that felt like punishment for being a victim. Reaper listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker but his voice remaining gentle when he finally spoke. "They had no right to do this to you. Any of them, the students, the administration, all of them." "I don't know what to do," Ava admitted, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I can't afford to lose this job, but I can't just pretend it didn't happen." "You won't have to," Reaper said, pulling out his phone. "I know some people who can help. Good people who understand how to fight these battles." He made 3 calls in quick succession. The first was to a civil rights lawyer he'd met during a charity ride years ago. The second was to Pastor Linda Moreno, a community organizer known for her work with victims of injustice. The third was to a local journalist who owed him a favor. As Ava listened to his side of the conversations, she felt something shift inside her, a tiny spark of hope replacing the helpless anger she'd been carrying. "They'll be here this afternoon," Reaper said, putting his phone away. "Pastor Linda especially. She's good at bringing communities together, making people listen." "Why are they willing to help?" Ava asked. "They don't even know me." "Because what happened to you isn't just about you anymore," Reaper explained. "It's about every kid who's been bullied, every teacher who's been silenced, every time money and influence have been used to cover up wrongdoing." As the day progressed, Ava watched in amazement as her small apartment became a center of activity. Pastor Linda arrived first, her warm presence filling the room with calm purpose. The lawyer followed, bringing stacks of papers and quiet determination. The journalist came with questions and promises of exposing the truth. That evening, exhausted but feeling less alone than she had in days, Ava went to her kitchen for water. Through the window, she could see Reaper pacing in the parking lot, phone to his ear. "Yeah, I've seen the pattern," she heard him say, as his voice carried through the partially open window. "This goes deeper than one incident. How many other complaints have been buried? How many other victims pressured into silence?" Ava froze, glass halfway to her lips. There was something in his tone that suggested this was bigger than her case. Much bigger. She thought about other teachers who had suddenly left, other students who had transferred without explanation. For the first time, she realized that her story might be just one thread in a larger tapestry of silence and cover-ups. The thought was both terrifying and somehow empowering, because now, finally, someone was ready to pull at those threads and see what unraveled. The morning light filtered through Ava's kitchen window, casting a soft glow on the scattered papers covering her small table. She sat with a steaming mug of coffee, scrolling through her email, while Reaper reviewed printed messages spread out before him. "Here's another one," Ava said quietly, turning her laptop screen toward him. "A student from 2 years ago. She says the same girl who slapped me used to corner others in the bathroom. When they reported it, nothing happened." Reaper leaned forward, his weathered face tightening as he read. "The Hartman girl. Always the Hartman girl, or one of the Ellisons. Notice that pattern?" Ava nodded, reaching for a yellow legal pad where she'd been keeping notes. The list of incidents was growing longer by the hour. Since the video had gone viral, her inbox had been flooded with messages from current and former students, each sharing their own experiences of bullying and intimidation. "Look at this one," Reaper said, sliding a printed email across the table. "Math teacher, 2018. Reported Rachel Ellison for cheating on finals. 2 weeks later, she's gone. Official reason was Personal matters. Ava's hands trembled slightly as she read the email. The teacher's words echoed her own experience: the closed-door meetings, the subtle threats, the pressure to stay quiet. "There's so many of them," she whispered. "How did they keep this quiet for so long?" Reaper's phone buzzed, and he checked the message. "That was Pastor Linda. She's been making calls, and a name keeps coming up. Margaret Wheeler. She taught English at Ridgewood until last spring. Left suddenly, middle of the semester." "I remember hearing about that," Ava said, frowning. "There were rumors, but nothing concrete." "Linda says she's willing to talk." Reaper looked at Ava intently. "She's meeting us at the Main Street Cafe at 2 o'clock. Think you're up for it?" Ava hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I need to know the truth." They spent the next few hours organizing the evidence they'd gathered. Ava created a timeline, marking each incident with dates, names, and outcomes. A pattern emerged, clear as day. Whenever wealthy students were involved, complaints disappeared. Administrative records were altered. Problems were swept away like they'd never existed. At 1:45 in the afternoon, they walked into Main Street Cafe. The bell above the door chimed softly as they entered. Ava spotted Margaret Wheeler immediately, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "Mrs. Wheeler?" Ava approached carefully. "I'm Ava Daniels, and this is my Uncle Reaper." Margaret looked up, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Please, sit. And call me Margaret." She waited until they were settled before continuing. "I saw the video. It was like watching history repeat itself." "What happened to you?" Ava asked gently. Margaret's fingers tightened around her cup. "Last March, I caught Taylor Hartman and her friends cyberbullying a freshman girl. Horrible things. Death threats, doctored photos. The girl was terrified to come to school." She took a shaky breath. "I gathered evidence, documented everything, took it straight to the principal." "Let me guess," Reaper said quietly. "Nothing happened to the Hartman girl." "Worse than nothing," Margaret replied. "The next day I was called into a meeting. The superintendent was there with Taylor's parents and their lawyer. They had a stack of complaints, supposedly from parents concerned about my teaching methods, all dated months before, but I'd never heard about them." Ava felt sick. "They fabricated complaints against you?" Margaret nodded. "They gave me a choice: resign immediately with a reference letter or face an investigation into my inappropriate conduct with students. The Hartmans made it clear they'd spare no expense to destroy my reputation." "Did you keep any evidence?" Reaper asked. "Documents, emails, anything?" "I kept everything." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I was too scared to use it before, but seeing that video..." She slid the envelope across the table. Maybe it's time someone finally stood up to them. Back at Ava's apartment that evening, they spread Margaret's documents across the kitchen table. There were emails, screenshots, dated complaints that had never been filed, and most damning of all, a recording of her meeting with the superintendent and the Hartmans. Ava sat heavily in her chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what they'd discovered. "This isn't just about my case anymore, is it?" Reaper shook his head, his expression grim but determined. "No, it's not. This is systematic. The Hartmans and Ellisons have been using their money and influence to control the school for years. Anyone who threatens that control gets pushed out or silenced." "How many others are there?" Ava wondered aloud, looking at the wall where they'd pinned their timeline. "How many people were afraid to speak up?" "Too many," Reaper said, "but maybe that's about to change." He gestured to the evidence surrounding them, the emails, the testimonies, Margaret's documents. "We've got proof now, real proof of a pattern of corruption and cover-ups." Ava looked at her uncle, seeing the same mix of anger and determination she felt. "What do we do with it?" "We use it," Reaper said firmly. "All of it. The lawyer's coming tomorrow morning. With this much evidence, we can build a case that goes way beyond a single incident. We can expose the whole system." They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding the magnitude of what they'd stumbled onto. This wasn't just about a slap in a hallway anymore. It was about years of abuse, silenced voices, and powerful families who thought their money put them above the law. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Ava and Reaper continued sorting through the documents, each piece adding to the picture of corruption they were uncovering. The stack of evidence grew higher, and with it, their resolve to see justice done, not just for Ava, but for everyone who had been silenced before her. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Reaper's motorcycle rumbled to life in the parking lot. He'd been up since 5 o'clock, making calls and activating what he called his network of good trouble. By 9 o'clock, cars began arriving at Ava's apartment complex. First came Sarah Chen, the civil rights lawyer, carrying a leather briefcase and radiating quiet competence. "Let's document everything while it's fresh," she said, setting up her laptop at Ava's kitchen table. "Every detail matters." For 2 hours, Ava relived that horrible moment in the hallway. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Who else was present? Did any teachers witness it? What exactly did the principal say in that meeting? While they worked, Reaper paced the living room, fielding calls. His voice grew animated as he spoke to old friends. "Yeah, brother, it's worse than we thought. These kids need help. You still running that youth program?" "Perfect." Around 11:30 in the morning, Pastor Linda Moreno arrived. She was a steady presence with kind eyes and a gentle smile that put Ava at ease immediately. "I've reserved the community center for this afternoon," Pastor Linda explained. "We're creating a safe space for people to share their stories. No cameras, no phones, just honest conversation." Ava nodded, twisting her hands nervously. "Do you really think people will come?" "They're already asking to," Pastor Linda assured her. "Your story broke something open, Ava. People are ready to talk." Throughout the afternoon, more supporters arrived. 3 former Hells Angels, now running youth outreach programs, showed up on gleaming motorcycles. They looked intimidating in their leather jackets, but their eyes were kind as they shook Ava's hand. "I'm Marcus," said one, his gray beard neatly trimmed. "We work with troubled kids. Teach them there's better ways than violence. What happened to you ain't right." Around 2 o'clock, Ava found the first envelope on her doorstep, then another, and another. Students, still afraid to come forward openly, were leaving evidence. Printouts of cruel text messages, screenshots of deleted social media posts, USB drives full of documentation. "Smart kids," Reaper said, carefully organizing each piece of evidence. "They're braver than they know." At 4:30, Reaper sat Ava down in her living room. "Time for some coaching, sweetheart. Tonight you're going to tell your story." "I don't know if I can," Ava whispered. "Yes, you can." Reaper's voice was firm but gentle. "Stand up straight. Plant your feet. Remember, you're not just speaking for yourself anymore." For an hour, he worked with her on breathing, on projecting her voice, on maintaining eye contact. "Fear's normal," he explained, "but you can't let it stop you. Those kids need to see an adult stand up and say, 'Enough.'" By 6 o'clock, they arrived at the community center. Pastor Linda had arranged chairs in a circle. People filtered in slowly at first, then in steady groups. Parents, teachers, former students, current students who'd gotten permission to attend. Ava's heart pounded as Pastor Linda opened the meeting. "We're here to listen," she said simply. "To understand, to support each other." Taking a deep breath, Ava stood. Her voice shook at first as she described the hallway incident. But as she continued, speaking about the cover-up attempt, the suspension, the online harassment, her voice grew stronger. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a mother raised her hand. "My daughter went through something similar last year," she said. "They threatened to revoke her college recommendations if she reported it." Another parent spoke up. Then another. A former teacher described being pressured to change grades for certain students. A cafeteria worker talked about witnessing bullying and being told to mind her own business. Ava sat listening, amazed at how many people had been carrying these stories in silence. Reaper stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, nodding encouragingly whenever she caught his eye. The meeting lasted until 9 o'clock. As people began leaving, many stopped to hug Ava or squeeze her hand. "Thank you for speaking up," they said. "Thank you for being brave." Back home, exhausted but feeling stronger than she had in days, Ava checked her email one last time before bed. There was a new message from an anonymous account. Her hands trembled as she read. "Ms. Daniels, I'm scared to tell you who I am, but there's more you need to know. What happened to you wasn't random. They were following orders. I have proof, but I need to know I can trust you. Please help." Ava stared at the screen, her newfound strength wavering slightly at the implications. She forwarded the email to Sarah Chen, then sat in the quiet of her apartment, listening to Reaper's motorcycle rumbling away as he headed back to his motel. For the first time since the slap, she felt something beyond fear and shame. She felt hope. The morning sun filtered through the library's tall windows as Ava sat in a secluded corner of the reference section, her heart thumping against her ribs. At exactly 10 o'clock, a girl with long, dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses approached cautiously, glancing over her shoulder. "Ms. Daniels?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm Sophie." Ava gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Thank you for meeting me, Sophie." The girl sat down, pulling her backpack close. Her hands shook as she removed a worn notebook. "What I'm about to show you, they'd destroy me if they knew." "I won't let that happen," Ava promised, thinking of Reaper waiting outside in his motorcycle, keeping watch. Sophie opened her notebook, revealing pages of careful notes. "I work as an office aide during 4th period. Last semester, I overheard 2 teachers talking about a digital folder called Special Cases. It's hidden on the school's secure server." She pushed her glasses up nervously. "They use it to store complaints that get resolved, their word for buried. Bullying reports, harassment claims, even grade tampering. Everything that could hurt the school's reputation." Ava leaned forward. "Do you know how to access it?" Sophie nodded, sliding over a piece of paper with login credentials. "One of the administrators always forgets to log out. I've been documenting everything I could find." Back at her apartment, Ava called Sarah Chen, the civil rights lawyer Reaper had contacted. Within an hour, Sarah arrived with her laptop and began reviewing Sophie's information. "This is exactly what we needed," Sarah said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "With proof of systematic suppression of complaints, we can build a solid case for institutional negligence." Reaper paced the small living room, his heavy boots quiet on the carpet. "I know a journalist at the Tribune, Dave Martinez. He's got integrity, won't sensationalize the story." "Make the call," Sarah agreed. "But first, Ava needs to prepare for tonight." The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock at the high school auditorium. All afternoon, Ava practiced her speech, her voice growing stronger with each run-through. Reaper listened patiently, offering gentle suggestions. "Remember to breathe," he reminded her. "Your story has power. Let them feel it." By 6:30, the auditorium was filling up. Parents, teachers, students, and community members packed the rows. News vans lined the parking lot. Ava waited backstage, smoothing her simple blue dress with trembling hands. "You've got this, sweetheart," Reaper said softly. "Just speak from your heart." At 7:15, after the mayor's introduction, Ava walked to the podium. The lights felt hot on her face as she looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, her throat closed up. Then she caught sight of Sophie in the third row, giving her a tiny nod. "3 weeks ago," Ava began, her voice quavering slightly, "I was a substitute teacher who loved art and believed in the goodness of our school system. Then I was assaulted in a hallway while other adults looked away." She took a deep breath. "But this isn't just about a slap. It's about dignity. It's about the fear that keeps us silent when we see wrong being done. It's about what happens when we value reputation over truth." As she spoke, her voice grew stronger. She shared stories from other teachers, from parents, from students, careful to protect identities. She talked about OCT, the hidden folder, the systematic silencing, the culture of fear. "Our children are watching," she said, tears gleaming in her eyes. "They're learning what we'll tolerate, what we'll ignore, what we'll excuse. They're learning whether we'll stand up for what's right or look away to protect the powerful." The room was absolutely silent. "I'm standing here today because someone finally refused to look away, because people in this community found the courage to speak up, because sometimes it takes just one person saying, 'Enough,' to help others find their voice." Her hands had stopped shaking. "We have a choice to make. We can keep pretending these problems don't exist, or we can face them together with honesty and courage. Our children deserve a school where truth matters more than image, where every voice is heard, not just the loudest or the wealthiest." She looked directly into the news cameras. "I choose truth. I choose courage. I choose to stand up, even though I'm scared. Because dignity isn't something that should have to be earned. It's something we all deserve." For a moment after she finished, the room was completely still. Then someone started clapping. The applause spread like a wave, growing into a standing ovation. People were crying, hugging, nodding vigorously. News reporters swarmed forward as Ava stepped down from the podium. "Ms. Daniels, would you be willing to do an interview? Can we schedule a segment for tomorrow morning? We'd like to do an in-depth piece on school bullying." Sarah Chen stepped in smoothly, handling the press while Reaper guided Ava through the crowd. Well-wishers reached out to touch her arm, thank her, share quick words of support. By 11 o'clock, the parking lot had finally emptied. Ava walked beside Reaper toward his motorcycle, the night air cool on her flushed cheeks. "You did good, kid," Reaper said gruffly, but his eyes were proud. "I couldn't have done it without you," Ava replied, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The motorcycle's chrome gleamed under the streetlights as they prepared to head home, their spirits high with the feeling of victory, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Morning light filtered through Ava's curtains as her phone buzzed repeatedly on the nightstand. She reached for it groggily, still tired from last night's emotional town hall meeting. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through dozens of angry messages flooding her inbox and social media. "How dare you spread lies about our children? You're just an attention-seeking substitute. Go back where you came from." Her hands shook as she opened the local news website. The headline made her stomach drop. "Questions arise about teachers' stability and motives in school controversy." The article painted her as emotionally unstable, questioning her teaching credentials and suggesting she had fabricated evidence. Worse, they dug into Reaper's past, highlighting his former Hell's Angels connection and implying he was manipulating her for some criminal agenda. She called Reaper immediately. "They're saying terrible things about us both." "I know, kid." His voice was steady but tense. The Hartmans and Ellisons hired Blackwell and Associates. They're known for aggressive reputation management. Turn off your phone and stay inside today. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While waiting, Ava watched in horror as more news stations picked up the story. Each report seemed to twist her words from last night more severely, making her sound unhinged and vindictive. They played clips of concerned-looking parents, all from wealthy families, expressing worry about this unstable woman's influence on their children. The knock at her door made her jump. Reaper stood there, his expression grim. "Sarah's on her way. The lawyers want to meet." "I don't understand," Ava said, hugging herself. "How did everything flip so fast?" "Money talks," Reaper replied, settling into her armchair. "And these families have plenty of it. They're trying to bury the truth under doubt and fear." Around noon, Sarah Chen arrived with a thick folder of documents. "They're moving fast," she explained, spreading papers across Ava's kitchen table. "They've filed complaints with the school board, questioning your mental fitness to teach. They're pushing for a complete shutdown of the investigation." Ava's mailbox flag caught her eye through the window. "I should check the mail," she said quietly, needing a moment of normalcy. But normalcy shattered when she opened the envelope she found. Inside was a crude note, allegedly from Reaper, threatening to cause chaos at the school and make them pay. The handwriting was nothing like his, but it sent chills down her spine. "They're getting desperate," Reaper growled when she showed him. "This is amateur hour stuff." Sarah examined the note carefully. "Amateur or not, the school board will use this. They're looking for any excuse to shut down the hearings." As predicted, within hours, the school board announced an emergency meeting. By evening, they'd voted to suspend all hearings pending a security review. The local news celebrated it as responsible leadership protecting student safety. Sarah's phone call that night was blunt. "This is just the beginning. They'll keep escalating until you back down or they destroy your credibility completely. Are you prepared for that?" After hanging up, Ava sat at her kitchen table, pushing cold pasta around her plate. Guilt gnawed at her stomach as she thought about Reaper's reputation being dragged through the mud because of her. Through her window, she could see him standing under the streetlight, a solid, protective presence. But even from here, she could see the weight on his shoulders. His past, which he'd worked so hard to move beyond, was being used as a weapon against them both. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the window. "I never meant to bring all this down on you." Outside, Reaper lit a cigarette, its ember glowing in the darkness. He'd known his history would surface eventually. Now he wondered if his presence in Ava's life would do more harm than good. The familiar guilt of failing his family threatened to overwhelm him, but he stood his ground. He wouldn't abandon her again, no matter what they threw at them. The streetlight cast long shadows as both niece and uncle grappled with their private fears, neither willing to admit how deeply the day's events had shaken them. The night grew colder, but Reaper remained at his post, a sentinel against the gathering storm of lies and manipulation threatening to overwhelm them both. Sarah's warning echoed in their minds. Things would get worse before they got better. Much worse. And tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attacks, new attempts to silence the truth they'd fought so hard to expose. The morning light filtered through Ava's curtains, but she couldn't bring herself to open her laptop or check her phone. Yesterday's barrage of accusations and lies had left her feeling hollow. She sat at her kitchen table, stirring a cup of tea that had long gone cold, wondering if speaking up had been worth the cost. Her apartment felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in with each passing hour. The familiar comfort of her modest living space had been replaced by a suffocating anxiety. Even her beloved art supplies in the corner remained untouched, Her usual source of solace now seemed distant and unreachable. The knock at her door made her flinch. Through the peephole, she saw Reaper's broad shoulders and something he was carrying, an old, worn shoebox that had seen better days. When she opened the door, his expression was different than she expected. Instead of the grim determination of yesterday, there was an unusual softness in his eyes. "Morning, kid," he said, stepping inside. "Got something you need to see." Reaper set the battered shoebox on her coffee table and settled onto her couch. The cardboard was creased and faded, held together with yellowing tape. "These started coming in last night," he explained, removing the lid, "and they haven't stopped since." Inside were dozens of letters, notes, and printed emails. Some were handwritten on notebook paper, others typed and printed. There were even a few greeting cards with heartfelt messages scrawled inside. "People have been dropping these off at the motel," Reaper said, picking up one of the letters. "Others found ways to contact me online. They all want to talk to you, Ava. Want to hear what they're saying?" Ava nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as she perched on the edge of her armchair. Reaper unfolded the first letter and began to read. "Dear Ms. Daniels, I was a student at Ridgewood High 3 years ago. What happened to you happened to me too, but I was too scared to speak up. Watching you stand up at that town meeting made me cry. For the first time, I don't feel alone anymore. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be." Ava's breath caught in her throat as Reaper picked up another letter. "My daughter came home from school yesterday telling me about your speech," he read. "She's been bullied for 2 years, and we've gotten nowhere with the administration. Seeing you fight back has given us hope. Please don't give up." Letter after letter, message after message, stories poured out. Parents whose children had transferred schools to escape bullying. Former teachers who'd been pushed out for reporting incidents. Current students writing anonymously about their own experiences with the wealthy cliques and administrative cover-ups. Tears began rolling down Ava's cheeks as Reaper's gruff voice softened around the words of gratitude and support. Each letter carried the same message. She had given voice to something people had been afraid to speak about for years. "I never knew," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "I thought I was alone in this." Reaper set down the letters and leaned forward. "That's what they want you to think. That's how they keep people quiet, making them feel isolated. But look at all these people, Ava. You've started something important here." A knock at the door interrupted them. Pastor Linda Moreno stood there with Sarah Chen, their lawyer. Both women carried notebooks and determined expressions. "We need to strategize," Sarah said, as they settled around Ava's small dining table. "The opposition is well funded, but we have something they don't: truth and numbers." Pastor Linda spread out several pages of notes. "The community is rallying. We've had dozens of people reach out to the church offering to speak about their experiences. We need to organize these stories, document everything." They spent the afternoon building their case. Sarah took detailed notes about each letter, creating a timeline of incidents. Pastor Linda worked on organizing a support network for students and parents who wanted to come forward. Reaper made calls to contacts who could help protect people from retaliation. As the sun began to set, Ava moved to her small kitchen to prepare dinner. The simple act of chopping vegetables and boiling pasta gave her hands something to do while her mind processed everything. She was making enough for 2. Reaper had barely eaten all day, too busy coordinating their response to the smear campaign. The sudden buzzing of Reaper's phone cut through the gentle sounds of cooking. He stepped onto Ava's small balcony to take the call, but through the glass door, she could see his expression change, eyebrows rising, jaw tightening. When he came back inside, there was an urgency in his movements. "That was Joey Martinez, the night custodian at Ridgewood," he said quietly. "He's worked there for 15 years. Says he needs to meet with us first thing tomorrow morning. has something we need to see." Ava set down the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir the pasta. "What kind of something?" "Wouldn't say. Over the phone." Reaper checked his watch. "We need to meet him at 5:30 tomorrow morning before his shift ends. Says it's important, and he's scared." The pasta timer dinged, but neither of them moved. The weight of everything, the letters, the stories, and now this mysterious meeting, settled around them like a heavy blanket. But something had changed. The despair of the morning had been replaced by something stronger. Purpose. "I'll be ready," Ava said, turning back to drain the pasta. "Whatever it takes to get the truth out." Reaper nodded, watching his niece move with newfound determination. The fear wasn't gone. They both knew tomorrow would bring new challenges. But the shoebox of letters sitting on her coffee table was proof they weren't fighting alone anymore. Sometimes courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about continuing despite the fear, strengthened by the knowledge that others were standing with you. The evening wound down as they shared the simple meal. The letters of support spread out around them like a shield against whatever tomorrow might bring. Outside, the sun set on another day in their fight for justice. But inside Ava's apartment, hope had taken root once again. The early morning air bit cold and sharp as Ava and Reaper pulled into Ridgewood High's maintenance entrance at 5:25. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting everything in soft shades of purple and gray. Their footsteps echoed in the empty parking lot as they made their way to the small service door where Joey Martinez had asked to meet them. The custodian was already waiting, his weathered face tight with anxiety. He clutched a sealed cardboard box to his chest, eyes darting around the empty lot. "Quick," he whispered. "Inside the maintenance office." Once inside the small room filled with cleaning supplies and repair equipment, Joey set the box on a workbench and took a deep breath. "I've been keeping these for 3 years," he said, his hands shaking slightly as he broke the tape seal. "Every time they told us to shred something or delete files, I made copies first. Just didn't feel right, destroying evidence like that." Ava peered into the box, her breath catching. Inside were hundreds of papers, printed emails, incident reports, teacher statements, and screenshots of deleted digital records. Each one documented a complaint about bullying or harassment, and each one showed how the administration had systematically buried the incidents. "Look at the dates and names," Joey said, pulling out a thick folder. "Every time a wealthy donor's kid got reported, the same pattern happened. Complaints disappeared, teachers got pressured to change their statements, kids were told to keep quiet." Tears welled up in Ava's eyes as she read through the documents. All these students, all these teachers, everyone who tried to speak up. Reaper was already photographing key documents with his phone, sending them directly to Sarah Chen, their lawyer. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Proof of a pattern." "I knew someday someone would stand up to them," Joey said, looking at Ava. "When I saw what happened to you, how you didn't back down, I knew it was time." Ava hugged the custodian, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to save these." They carefully repacked the box, and Reaper carried it to his truck. By now the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the empty school grounds. As they drove away, Reaper was already making calls, to journalists he trusted, to Sarah Chen, to Pastor Linda. The pastor's response was immediate. She would organize a community gathering at the town amphitheater that evening. "People need to see this evidence," she said over the speakerphone. "They need to know they're not alone." Throughout the morning, Ava and Reaper worked from her apartment, helping Sarah Chen catalog the evidence, while Pastor Linda mobilized the community. By early afternoon, the first news van appeared in town. a local station responding to tips about the gathering. Then another arrived, and another. "You don't have to speak tonight if you don't want to," Reaper told Ava as they watched a fourth news van drive past her window. "But if you do, remember, you're not just speaking for yourself anymore. You're speaking for everyone in that box." Ava stood at her window, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. More vehicles were arriving, parents, teachers, community members heading toward the amphitheater. The energy in the air was electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. "I'll speak," she said quietly, but with certainty. They all deserved to be heard, and now they will be. They gathered their things, the box of evidence, their notes, their hopes for justice, and headed toward the door. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a beautiful backdrop for what promised to be a night of truth-telling and transformation. As they walked to Reaper's truck, more news vans turned onto the street, their satellite dishes stark against the colorful sky. The time for silence was over. Tonight, everything would change. The evening sun cast long shadows across Ridgewood's outdoor amphitheater as people streamed in from all directions. Parents clutched their children's hands, teachers walked in groups, and students gathered in clusters, their voices creating a nervous buzz that filled the warm air. News vans lined the perimeter, their cameras already rolling as reporters did live stand-ups against the backdrop of the growing crowd. Ava stood backstage, her heart pounding. Through the curtain, she could see hundreds of faces, far more than she'd expected. Pastor Linda squeezed her hand. "Remember," she said softly, "God gives us strength when we stand for truth." Sarah Chen, their lawyer, organized the evidence on a table while Reaper paced nearby, his presence both protective and reassuring. At 7 o'clock sharp, Pastor Linda stepped onto the stage. The crowd fell silent. "Tonight," the pastor's voice rang out clear and strong, "we gather as a community to hear truth that has been hidden for far too long." One by one, they took the stage. Ava, Reaper, Sarah Chen. The lawyer spoke first, methodically presenting the evidence found in Joey's box. On large screens behind them, photographs of key documents appeared, emails ordering the deletion of incident reports, letters threatening teachers who spoke up, documentation of complaints that mysteriously vanished. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Parents began to cry. A mother stood up, shouting, "That happened to my daughter 2 years ago. They said there was no record." Sarah Chen nodded grimly. "The pattern goes back 3 years. Systematic burial of complaints, particularly when they involved children of wealthy donors." Then Ava stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but grew stronger as she spoke. "What happened to me wasn't just about a slap. It was about power, about silencing those who dare to speak up. But tonight, that silence ends." As if her words had broken a dam, students began standing up in the crowd. A sophomore girl called out, "I was bullied last year. They said I was lying." Others joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of long-suppressed truth. Halfway through the presentations, the superintendent, Dr. Richard Maxwell, strode down the center aisle. "This is an unauthorized gathering," he shouted. "These documents were stolen." The crowd erupted in angry shouts, drowning him out. Parents stood, pointing fingers. "You knew!" someone yelled. "You knew and did nothing!" Pastor Linda raised her hands for quiet. "Dr. Maxwell, for years you've had your say. Tonight, we speak." Red-faced, the superintendent turned and stalked away as cameras followed his retreat. More students came forward, forming a line to speak at the microphone. Each story built upon the last. Incidents of bullying, harassment, intimidation, all buried by the administration. Local news stations, broadcasting live, scrolled breaking headlines, school scandal exposed, and years of cover-ups revealed. At 9:30, as the testimonies continued, a member of the school board walked onto the stage. She looked shaken. "In light of tonight's revelations," she announced, "the board has accepted Dr. Maxwell's resignation, effective immediately. Furthermore, we are requesting a full state investigation into all allegations." The crowd erupted in cheers. Parents hugged their children. Teachers wiped away tears. Reporters rushed to phones and cameras, spreading the news. Ava stood under the bright lights, watching the scene unfold. Her legs felt weak with relief and exhaustion. The weight of secrets had lifted, replaced by the lighter burden of truth in the open. She felt Reaper's strong hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You did it, kid," he said quietly. "You gave them all their voices back." Pastor Linda led the crowd in a prayer of healing. As the words, "Amen," echoed across the amphitheater, hundreds of phones lit up like stars, held high in solidarity. The truth had finally broken free, and Ridgewood would never be the same. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Ridgewood High as Ava walked the familiar hallways, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The atmosphere felt different now, lighter, hopeful. A notice board displayed new anti-bullying protocols, and students smiled warmly as they passed. Principal Sarah Martinez, who had replaced Dr. Maxwell, met Ava in the art room. "The school board unanimously voted to offer you the permanent position," she said, spreading out paperwork on a paint-splattered table. "We want you to develop an expanded art therapy program. Your strength through this whole ordeal has shown us what real leadership looks like." Across town, the 3 girls who had assaulted Ava began their first day of restorative justice training. Instead of expulsion, they would spend the semester working with counselors and community leaders, learning about the impact of their actions. At the local youth center, Reaper found his own path to healing. Teens gathered around him, drawn to his honest stories about mistakes and redemption. "Violence looks strong," he told them, "but real strength? That's standing up for what's right without throwing a punch." As weeks passed, Ava's art program blossomed. Students who once stayed silent began expressing themselves through paint and clay. The hallway where she had been assaulted transformed as she worked on a towering mural. Day by day, the image emerged. A young woman standing straight-backed in golden light, her face serene and determined. "It's beautiful," whispered a freshman girl, watching Ava add final touches. "It makes me feel brave just looking at it." One evening, Ava's kitchen filled with the aroma of homemade lasagna as she prepared for a special dinner. Her mother Clara arrived first, bringing warm bread and nervous energy. When Reaper's motorcycle rumbled outside, Clara tensed, then relaxed as her brother appeared in the doorway, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "Thought these might brighten things up," he said gruffly, and Clara's eyes welled with tears. They gathered around Ava's small table, years of distance melting away as they shared food and hesitant stories. Clara talked about old family photos she'd found. Reaper described the teens he worked with at the center. Ava watched them both, her heart full as laughter gradually replaced awkward pauses. "Remember when Ava was 5, Clara began, and she painted the cat with watercolors?" "Poor thing was purple for a week," Reaper chuckled, and suddenly they were all laughing, the sound warm and healing in the cozy kitchen. After dessert, Ava walked them to their vehicles. The spring evening was mild, stars beginning to peek through purple clouds. Clara hugged her daughter tight, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, honey." Reaper settled onto his motorcycle, the engine purring to life. He looked different now, lighter, as if setting down a heavy burden he'd carried for years. "You did good, kid," he said. "Real good." Ava watched as he rode away, taillights growing smaller until they vanished into the darkness. The rumble of his bike faded, leaving cricket song and gentle breeze. She stood there a moment longer, thinking about how truth had rippled through their town like stones thrown in still water, changing everything it touched. They had fought corruption not with fists or threats, but with courage and persistence. Sometimes, she realized, the strongest thing you can do is simply stand up and speak. Her mother's car turned the corner. Reaper's motorcycle was gone, but the warmth of their evening lingered, a promise of more healing to come. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.